On this week's Locked On NHL, we're less than 48 hours away from the NHL trade deadline. We've already had a couple of moves, though. We'll break those down. Plus, a superstar's season is over because of injury.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome inside this Wednesday, March 5th edition of Locked On NHL. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Ottawa Senators. With me, as always, from Locked On Toronto Maple Leafs, it is Mike DiStefano. As we approach the NHL trade deadline, there's no better time for our everydayers to be subscribed to every single Locked On NHL show. We have team shows, and when a player gets traded from that team to yours or from yours to theirs, don't you want to know what everyone's thinking in the fan base? Well, that's what we have here on the Locked On NHL channel. But Mikey, before we get to the trade talk, serious injury for Jack Hughes, undergoing shoulder surgery, and his season is done.
Yeah, it's a tough blow. That's a really tough blow for the New Jersey Devils, who thought, this is the year that they could get it, go over the hump. They made the splash, brought in Jacob Markstrom. They're playing some good hockey. And then all of a sudden the injuries hit. Markstrom gets hurt and, they start to sputter a little bit. And then Markstrom comes back. And now Jack Hughes is out for the season. It seems like it's just they have terrible luck with injuries. That's kind of been the biggest issue with New Jersey over the last 5 years, wouldn't you say? Whether it's Nico Hischier or it's Jack Hughes or it's the goaltending, that's just such an unlucky team, and they can't seem to stay on the ice.
Yeah, it's really tough, man. They've been struggling basically since Christmas. For more on the injury, we go to Locked On Devils co-host Trey Matthews.
What's up, guys? Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils here, and I have an update regarding Jack Hughes. The Devils provided the following medical update on Jack, who was injured on March 2nd against Vegas. Following a review of the imaging and subsequent conversations with Jack, his family, representatives, and the Devils' medical and athlete care staff, it was determined that Jack would proceed with shoulder surgery. He underwent the successful procedure earlier today. Hughes is expected to make a full recovery and be available for the 2025 training camp, but his season is done. For roster purposes, Jack has been placed on the LTIR, so the Devils will have $8 million to work with the trade deadline being on Friday. They can possibly pursue Rantanen, McCann, or Pettersson, but focusing on the now. This is a big blow for the Devils because they've been inconsistent since the Christmas break. Sometimes wins have been tough to come by. Offense has been tough to come by. They have been shut out 7 times this season. That is tied for second most in the NHL. Just above them are the Predators, who have been shut out 9 times. It's a big blow to the Devils' offense. Now they're going to have to rely on their defense and goaltending to try to rack up some of these wins. It's a humongous loss, and it's so unfortunate for Jack because for the second straight year, his season has been cut short due to shoulder surgery. Our worst fear has been realized. Jack re-aggravated his right shoulder. What was once a promising season leaves a lot of question marks. The Devils are still in a playoff position. They're third in the Metro, but the Rangers and Blue Jackets are right on their tail. And the Devils, once again, sometimes wins have been tough to come by. We're going to have to wait and see what they do come the trade deadline. I still anticipate for them to be buyers, but with Jack Hughes being sidelined, it's not going to be easy for New Jersey.
For more on the Devils, you can check out Trey at Locked On Devils. And he mentioned they've been struggling for a while. Mikey, they won 6 out of 7 games right around the holidays. And since then, they're 9-13-3. Do you think their playoff spot is almost in jeopardy? They've played 2 more games than Columbus and the Rangers.
Yeah,
they're only a few points up now.
It's going to be tough. I think it is going to be tough for them to retain. It's mainly just because of the guys who are the teams that are getting it going behind them. Like we talked about it for a while. It's an absolute gauntlet for those final few spots, those wild card spots. But maybe this injury opens up a little crack for, another one of those teams to pop into one of those 3-hole spots, and maybe they fall out of it. I think that it's going to be an absolute race all the way to the end. I think we all know that. I mean, we're sitting here. How many points are they now out? It's just a 4-point buffer, and they've got games in hand at that. Or they've played more games rather. So it's going to be dicey for them if they can't get some secondary scoring and some guys to step up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they attack the deadline, and that's a conversation that Trey will be having over and over again because the talent is there. They still have lots of good players. Markstrom needs to get back to his game. I know he's back, but he's been struggling of late.
Well, you pick up a lot of cap space. Like, that's the thing, right? With the Jack Hughes injury, LTIR, they pick up a lot of cap space. They can do something. They can make a big move. They've got assets, draft picks, prospects that if they're willing to make that trade, there are definitely some avenues that they could go down. We'll see if they're willing to do it. If they're willing to roll the dice on a season that they're not going to have Jack Hughes there for, I don't know. Like, that's kind of their big guy. It may be wasted assets if you're going for rental players, but the space is there if they want to do something.
All right. Well, that's a conversation that will continue. But with the Devils falling, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I'd say the New York Rangers even more so, have a huge opportunity ahead of them.
Oh, 100%. You're looking at this Rangers team, and they've won 7 of the last 10. I mean, they're just rolling right now, and they're finally clicking. Like, that JT Miller trade, dude, that's paying off in spades for the Rangers, not for the Canucks. The Canucks, did you see that stat the other day that JT Miller has twice as many points that Pettersson does shots since the trade? It's mind-numbing, a mind-numbing stat. And they've won 7 of the last 10. They've put themselves back into a wild card position, and only 6 points out of one of those, that Metro spot, chasing down the Devils. We've been beating the drum for the Rangers for a few years now, and I don't know what happened there midseason where they just completely lost themselves, but they're kind of getting back to being a top-tier team that went to the Eastern Conference Championship a season ago, Ross. It made no sense how they got so bad so quick this season, but it feels like they kind of got things back under wraps, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, John Chick's got to be excited, right? I felt like every time I tuned into Locked On New York Rangers, John was like, "Oh my god, like this season is still going on." Like they blew so many leads early, they could not get wins, and now all of a sudden they are not only in the playoff picture, but they control their own destiny here down the stretch. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Metropolitan shakes up, and that is one story. Another is the Tampa Bay Lightning, who not only have just become juggernauts, as we kind of expected on paper, but they struggled out of the gate for their standards, and now they make a huge splash. We'll hear from both the hosts of Locked On Tampa Bay Lightning and Seattle Kraken after their trade today that sees a 2-time Stanley Cup champion heading back to where he won those cups, and 2 first-round picks going the other way. That's next. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Look, when tip-off happens, when the puck drops, you gotta head to FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 sportsbook here of the Locked On Podcast Network, and with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening and you want to bet on the comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, check out combining your bets into a same-game parlay. I love the same-game parlays. If you have a gut reaction of who's going to score, then why not double up and have some fun at FanDuel? Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers will get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA and here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Welcome back, Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, where we have local experts on the biggest stories. Shout out to all of our everydayers out there that ride with us and vibe with us throughout the NHL season. Mikey, trade season is officially here. What a splash today between Tampa and Seattle.
Dude, I really, I saw that come across my timeline, and I'm like, hey, well, what else is going their way? Like, does that make sense to you? So the deal, Yanni Gourde, and hold on, I have the trade right here. It's Yanni
It's a
Gourde.
complicated one with the salary retention.
Yeah, there's a bunch of salary retention and whatnot, and I guess maybe that's what you're truly paying for is the salary retention when all said and done, so that you can go out and make multiple moves like this. But Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand for 2 first-round picks is essentially how it shakes out. I mean, you can do what you want with the salary retention, but giving up a couple of firsts for depth players really seem like 2 first-round picks. Like, didn't they learn their lesson from the Tanner Jeannot trade a couple of years ago? Like, I don't get this one at all. It seems like a massive overpayment.
Now, Bjorkstrand does have another year left on his deal, so they're hoping that that's a big part of the deal. They've done that before, right? Blake Coleman had another year on his deal. Barclay Goodrow had another year on his deal. So that's the MO of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let's
Brandon
go.
Hagel, that one turned out pretty good too.
Yeah, did it ever. And that was 2 first-round picks. So they've been in this. They don't care about picks. They'd rather NHL players. And Josh Sperber of Locked On Lightning is pretty fired up about the team going all in.
The Tampa Bay Lightning make their deadline splash in 2025, acquiring forwards Yanni Gourde, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and a 2026 fifth-round pick in exchange for a second-rounder, 2 first-rounders, and Mikey Eyssimont in a deal with the Seattle Kraken. To help facilitate some of Yanni Gourde's salary, the Detroit Red Wings got involved in the deal, retaining a quarter of Gourde's salary and giving the Tampa Bay Lightning a defender in the deal, Kyle Alcorn. And this is a huge trade for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It does give them a little bit more age and might not be on paper. Just looking at the ages, exactly what you're looking for. Eyssimont, 28 years old, and he gets exchanged for 2 30-year-olds, but he's getting exchanged for 2 players that are near the top of their game. By the playoffs, Ollie Bjorkstrand will have hit his 30th birthday, but he's nearing his 7th 20-goal season in the past 8 years. If he scores 4 more goals in the next 20 games of the season, it'll be the 4th straight 20-goal, 40-plus point season for Oliver Bjorkstrand, a right wing by trade for the Kraken. Certainly the main position that I think the Lightning needed to acquire. And Yanni Gourde, as many of you remember, a former Stanley Cup champion with the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2019 and 2021. Through 2021 with COVID kind of complicating some of that. But the 33-year-old is having a solid season for the Kraken, 17 points in just 36 games. And he could add to the experience that the Lightning have lost a little bit after they waived Cam Atkinson. So they waived Cam Atkinson, and he and Logan Brown now with the Syracuse Crunch to create room for these 2 forwards that I think add a lot more two-way depth to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Really solid forechecking ability in both of these guys. I think this is an absolute slam dunk trade for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It might hurt to give those top 10 protected picks, but the player that they gave away in Mikey Eyssimont had an even 0 in his plus-minus this season, 5 goals and 5 assists in 57 games this season. He typically played on the Lightning 4th line. Meanwhile, Bjorkstrand was a 2nd or 3rd liner, averaging about 15 minutes of ice time per game. Yanni Gourde around the same. So these are 2 guys who have a lot of experience playing with each other, now bringing a lot of extra veteran experience to this Tampa Bay Lightning team as they make a run towards the Stanley Cup. I think this trade could push the Tampa Bay Lightning from dark horses to bona fide contenders in the upcoming NHL playoffs.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the trade, the Seattle Kraken are trading for futures, and Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken, along with Zaim Beg, well, they understand Ron Francis's situation.
Erica L. Ayala and Zane Beg of Locked On Kraken here, and we were in the middle of recording when we got some breaking news from the Seattle Kraken. They make a trade. Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand off to Tampa Bay, Michael Eyssimont and a 26, 27 first-round pick, as well as a 25 second-round pick come to Seattle. Zame, we knew that the news was percolating as we were recording. What's your reaction now that it's officially official?
End of an era. Yanni Gourde, the Pepper Pot, and Oliver Bjorkstrand, the Maestro, were already down two of the better nicknames on the team. And Yanni Gourde goes back to Tampa Bay, where he won 2 Stanley Cups, where he was drafted from, taken in the expansion draft. I'm really going to miss Yanni's tenacity. I'm going to miss that great shot by Oliver Bjorkstrand. Both of them huge parts of the playoff run in year 2. And it is it's the end of a Kraken era. As they move on, they get great draft capital, they get great return, and it signals the beginning of a new era for Seattle as they move into a little bit of looks like a rebuild.
Indeed. And you and I, again, we're in the middle of having just that conversation. What does the future for the Seattle Kraken look like, including with some money in the bank? What does this mean for plugging some of the holes that the Seattle Kraken evidently have? We have that on an upcoming episode that we literally just recorded. And of course, throughout the week, because as we finished off our last episode, the Seattle Kraken aren't done yet. So if you want to know what moves we think are going to happen, then make sure you stay locked on Kraken. You can listen on any audio platform and, of course, watch every episode on YouTube. We'll catch you on the next episode.
For more from both of those great shows, make sure to check them out. Locked On Lightning and Locked On Seattle Kraken. More trade news on the other side with Locked On San Jose Sharks host JD Young. But we got breaking news tonight. The Nashville Predators acquire Michael Bunting in exchange for Luke Schenn and Tommy Novak. What kind of deal is this between two bottom feeders?
Yeah, we got to get into this. We got to get into this on the other side, pal. Like that's got to happen.
All right, well, we got lots to dive into then. Next, you're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Welcome back to Locked On NHL, your team every day, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Local experts on the biggest stories. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Ottawa Senators. That's Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. And what's your initial reaction to that trade between Nashville and Pittsburgh?
Why? Like, I don't understand it from either side. Like, you got two teams that should be selling off to contenders, and instead they're just moving, flipping rentals. Like, I guess, like, I could somewhat see it from Pittsburgh's perspective, where you're bringing in, Luke Schenn, who has value elsewhere, and I guess, you could also look at it. Tommy Novak is a pending UFA that might, or actually, I think he's got some term left on his deal as well. Now I think about it, I think he just signed a 4-year deal like last season. So you're pretty much, I think, moving out Bunting's money and you're bringing in Novak, and then hopefully, I'm assuming they're going to flip Schenn. Like, it would not make any sense for this Pittsburgh Penguins team to hold on to Luke Schenn throughout the trade deadline. I imagine this is, a real quick stop in Pittsburgh for Luke Schenn. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, you'd think so, but apparently all the insiders, they tweeted at it all at the same time. So you're just thinking, okay, Kyle Dubas sent them a text that they really value the leadership and determination of Luke Schenn.
I mean, sure. What else are you going to say? You're not going to come out blatantly and say, yeah, I mean, we're going to trade him, so it doesn't matter. Don't ask me about Luke Schenn.
Well, I think Ottawa did that with Ian Cole. They're like, don't even come. We're flipping you for a pick.
And that's probably what the internal conversation was like, because I bet you Luke Schenn's not too pleased about going to Pittsburgh. At this point in his career, he wants to compete for a Stanley Cup. And him and this is the second time now that Kyle Dubas has acquired Luke Schenn at the deadline. 2 years ago, when the Leafs kind of pushed the chips all the way in, he went out and he brought in Luke Schenn when he was with who was he with at the time? Vancouver, I believe. Was he still at Vancouver at that point?
He's been all over.
He has been. That guy's been a suitcase, and now he's in Pittsburgh. And I expect within 48 hours for him to be elsewhere, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the Penguins, who are completely out of it and should be trying to trade for as many futures pieces. It's not a team that's flush with prospects or picks. So if you could get a third rounder or you can get a B-level prospect for Luke Schenn, you got to do it. Kyle Dubas has to do it. I don't understand the point in keeping him long-term.
Me neither. And what does Michael Bunting do for the Nashville Predators?
That's another great question. I'm really not too sure. Like, he's someone who can give you some top 9 minutes. Like, he's an overpaid third liner, in my opinion. He's not really that responsible defensively either, but he can pop you in a goal or two. He can, he's good around the net. Like, I watched him a lot, obviously, when he was in Toronto, and he's a really strong player in and around that net, so he's a bit of a pest. But he was overpaid. He ended up getting a deal, I think, at $4.5 million AAV when he was with Carolina. Part of that Jake Gensel deal from last year, going from the Canes to the Pens, and now they flip him again this year. So we're talking about a guy who's now on his 4th team in 2 years, basically 3 years, I guess, if you go back to his time with the Leafs. So it went really well when he was with Toronto, playing with Austin Matthews, playing with Mitch Marner. Has not since then. We'll see if he can be of some sort of service to that group. But to me, I think for them, maybe it was just, I don't know, getting someone under term. Like, they wanted to get somebody who's got some term, and they just rolling the dice on Michael Bunting. I'm trying to think if there's some familiarity with Bunting and someone else within the organization, but I'm not too sure there really is. It is a bit of a head scratcher from both ends.
It makes no sense. So hopefully our friends over at Locked On Predators, Locked On Penguins can break this one down, because I have no idea. No idea. What I do know is that the markets are moving, all of them, even the market for goaltenders. Vitek Vanacek goes to the Panthers, and that is to fill the void left by Spencer Knight, who was traded last week for Seth Jones.
41 save Spencer Knight to you, brother.
Yeah, he was sick in his debut. They got outshot, 42-19 to LA, and they got a 5-1 win, and thanks in large part to Spencer Knight in goal. For more on the Vitek Vanacek to Florida trade, here's Locked On Sharks host, JD Young.
San Jose Sharks send Vitek Vanacek to the Florida Panthers for forward Patrick Giles. I'm JD Young of Locked On Sharks, and the Sharks send goalie Vitek Vanacek for AHL forward Patrick Giles. Giles, 6'5", 215-pound right-handed forward, undrafted out of Boston College, earned himself an NHL deal after a solid AHL season a couple years ago with the Florida Panthers. This is very much a depth move for the Sharks, and more importantly for the Barracuda, as they load up for a long playoff run, as Giles adds some much needed size to a smaller Barracuda lineup. So we'll break down this deal more on your next episode of Locked On Sharks, wherever you get podcasts, and of course you can watch on YouTube as well.
For more on Locked On Sharks, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Mikey, less than 2 days away from the trade deadline, which player are you eyeing the most as the biggest chip on the block?
Well, it's Mikko Rantanen, which a month ago, that clearly would not have been the case. He had just landed in Carolina, and you're thinking like, okay, they're gearing up to go for it in a wide open East. Hasn't gone that well for him, and he is not willing to play ball in contract extensions for Mikko Rantanen. And I believe Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts wrote today that they're doing their due diligence, checking to see what prices teams are willing to pay for Rantanen, because I don't think they want to go down the road they did last year with Jake Gensel. They let him walk after giving up a bunch of assets to acquire him. I think they are thinking to themselves, if we can't get him locked up by 3 p.m. on Tuesday, we got to sell him to the highest bidder and just kind of chalk it up as a loss. And sounds like there are a number. I mean, of course, there's going to be a number of teams, especially if they retain salary. You're getting this player for what, $2.5 million, I think is what the salary comes out to, the AAV, that cap hit. I mean, and this is premium. You get a player of that caliber for that cheap. Teams are going to pay up for it. They absolutely will pay up for it. I've heard Friedman mention the Leafs as a team that could be interested in him, the Stars, the Kings. There's a lot of teams that could be interested in Mikko Rantanen, and I'd imagine anyone in the NHL who has the assets to get it done will at least be kicking tires, but that's got to be the top dog on the list right now.
Yeah, and you got to think, too, there's going to be something else at play where the Hurricanes are a playoff team. They're going to, one, want something back, and two, like, they're not going to trade him to a team that they could play in the first round, would they?
Well, I mean, if the return is right, or I mean, if it makes sense for them, like, let's say, well, who are they currently slated to play in the playoffs? The Devils. I mean, if the Devils wanted to, make a trade with them. They just lost out on Jack Hughes. They've got a bunch of cap space. They wouldn't even need to get that extra salary retention realistically with that LTIR money. Maybe they are willing to make a trade and bring in, a player that could help them right now, along with maybe a first round pick and a futures player. Potentially there is a deal to be made between those two clubs. But yeah, perhaps they would prefer to send him westward, I would think. So maybe LA, Dallas could be two teams that should have some significant interest in bringing him in. And man, if he ends up in Dallas, what a wagon that team becomes.
No doubt. It's going to be interesting when we're back here next Wednesday to discuss how these teams look. No more bets after Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern when the NHL trade deadline will be here. We'll have more on Locked On NHL for you tomorrow here on Locked On NHL. Make sure to subscribe to all the local shows as well, from Locked On Senators, Locked On Maple Leafs, and all across the great network. Thanks to our Locked On host today, Trey Matthews from Locked On Devils. We had Locked On Lightning, Locked On Kraken, and Locked On Sharks here. This is the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.